Good morning, fabulous people. It's Friday. Welcome to the end of the week. In fact, is it really the end of the week when we're really every day is kind of looks the same, feels the same?
Is it Friday? Because my wife asked me yesterday, is today Thursday or Wednesday? So it is all a blur anyway. I don't know when anything starts and begins anymore. Hello, everybody. Welcome, global people. Welcome to the Friday edition of Two Chaps, Many Cultures. And I want to just give a quick shout out because, yes, this may be the end of the week for some of us. At least it's the last episode that we will do this week. However, I want to place a teaser for next week, Monday. If you've been wondering, what's that cool music that they play at the beginning of every episode? Well, you shall find out on Monday. Enough said, right, Brett?
Leave it at that. Just let that sit. Let that simmer.
Take all the time you need with that.
Take all the time you need. And next week will be basically the general theme of art across cultures. We're going to have some guests on that are really people you know that people you actually know but you don't know. There's another teaser, and people that have spoken to you, people that have told you what to do and you don't even know them. Like there's another little one. But we're still in this week of identity. We're still talking about identity perceived and real. I almost got those back to front. Perceived and real. Let me do that again. Get my Australian mouth going here. And we have another guest today, of course, who is a wonderful friend of ours and colleague who is going to help us talk about that today. And I'm going to welcome to the program Dr. Rashmi Kapse. Namaste, my dear, namaste.
Hello, Rashmi.
And the first question I was going to ask you guys is about the music. I just love it. I could dance to it.
As we do. We dance all morning to it before we go on this program. That's our exercise.
We try and do it before the video finishes because, you don't want to see these two white guys dance. This is not pretty. It is not good for the eyes, and we don't want to alienate our audience. So we kind of just jig in the background, and then we're all just very professional. Welcome everybody. Here we are, Two Chaps, Many Cultures. Welcome Rashmi Kapse, Dr. Rashmi Kapse, all the way from
Princeton, New Jersey, and all the way from India, and then UK, and then the US. So I've been a little bit around the world.
So if I were to ask you what your identity in terms of culture is, what would be your answer?
That's a confusing question.
Good.
I was just talking to Brett earlier and how that identity kind of evolved. It is, you see, when I was in India, I was complete Indian, trying to do things the way I should be doing, making sure everybody likes who I am as a person. If you see my cultural profile, I'm a very direct person. So I was told how to not be that direct so that I don't end up hurting people. But as I moved to the UK, I learned to eat with a fork and spoon and tried to be a little European, if you will. And then moving to the US, I wanted to fit in, wanted to be more global, I would say. But at the same time, trying to keep my identity as an Indian person, as an Indian mother. I have two wonderful children, so trying to make sure that I pass that culture on to them, that became very important.
So you have taken on multiple identities based on the environment you find yourself in, and you can bring one up or tone another one down as needed or as you feel is best for you in that situation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think being Indian helps because India itself is so diverse, so many multiple cultures. So to fit in, I grew up in Mumbai, and just to fit in that environment, I had neighbors who spoke a different language than I did, so I learned the language. I had friends who were from a different part of India, that ate different food. So I learned to eat that. And then there's so much of diversity there that when you move out of India, it's kind of hard to begin with, but it's not as hard as if you came from a very homogeneous culture.
Mm. I'm asking I'm going to ask a loaded question, and I'm aware of how stereotypical the question is. And please bear with me. Maybe you will pick me apart and put me in my place, and that is the purpose of that question. So, I've heard multiple times an acronym thrown around by people who are originally from India and don't currently live there. It's called NRI. You probably heard it yourself, non-resident Indians.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a basket that is big enough to hold everybody that is from India and doesn't live in India but is dispersed around the globe? Is that a big enough basket to put people in? And is there such a thing as an NRI identity?
Yes and no. Let me just answer your first question. The identity of NRI has been created by the Indian government. NRI means non-residential Indian. So anyone who is out of India for more than 180 days, I guess, at a stretch, and will be going back and forth, would be considered an NRI. So, they might not have a different identity. They might just have a different persona that, oh, I live outside of India and these are the things that I do. But over the years, I think you do transform depending on where you live around the world. And you will have a separate identity from the Indians that are in India. Just to give you an example, there are many stereotypical NRI videos that you can find on YouTube, or you can when people talk about it, oh, NRIs are like this and NRIs are like that. One of the things they will talk about is water bottles. NRIs will always carry water bottles with them. They won't drink the water in someone's house in India, or they might not eat raw food outside, or they might only go to bigger restaurants and not eat on the streets. And that could be common for most NRIs. And one of the reasons is that your inner stomach bacteria are not willing to take the food or the water that is in India after you live for a long time outside of India. And that might be the reason that some people might be overly cautious when they go to India, and that's kind of created that stereotypical view of an NRI.
Okay. I have a Gujarati friend who told me that, and he and his family lived away from India so long. I think he was a child when his parents moved away from India, and he says every time we go back, he speaks Gujarati. He speaks. I think he also speaks Hindi, and of course he speaks English. Every time he goes back, he says, "I pay Western people prices on the street markets because even my fellow country people, even my people recognize that I don't live here, and they recognize it by the clothes I wear, by the jewelry my wife is wearing, or by the way we just appear, how we occupy space. My body language tells a native person or a residential Indian that I may look like them on the surface level, but everything about me gives it away that I haven't lived here in a long time." Is it the same experience for you, Rashmi?
Not for me, but for my kids, yes.
Okay.
So when my kids go, sometimes they could get ripped off because they don't know the pricing or anything. But it's like we do in our regular life, right? When we talk to our clients, we talk to them about having a cultural interpreter. I would always say that if you're going shopping in India, if you're going after 5 years, always have a friend with you so that they can do the negotiation for you. I am still, I would say, pretty good at it. I'm good at negotiating, but there are times when I will not want to negotiate because I might end up thinking like, it's okay, I don't want to negotiate with them because they're only making so much. So that's just how I feel about when I don't negotiate, the reasons for not negotiating.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I've just got a question. This is a specific question because we talk about negotiations in cultures where sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's actually expected. If you don't negotiate, it's almost offensive, right? So is it that practice in India, in a market, or even in a regular store? This is we think about negotiating in a market, in a flea market type setting or something like that, and that would always be appropriate. But some cultures like it even just in regular stores. So what is that like in India, and is that regional too?
So some parts of India you can negotiate more than the others. People normally wouldn't negotiate in a store in a mall. But if it's a small strip mall and then there's a store that sells saris or clothes, then you would negotiate. It's expected that you will negotiate at least a little bit. If it's a street side vendor selling clothes, then yes, people will negotiate a lot. But if there is a street side vendor selling vegetables, then people who are doing well in life tend not to negotiate. Some of them who are again trying to save money for themselves will definitely negotiate even there. And I remember as a child going with my mom, and my mom was not the negotiating type, but I would see other women around saying, "Oh, can you throw in this as an extra thing? And can you throw in that as an extra thing? I'm paying you this much. Can you give me a couple lemons or a little bit of coriander?" And that was a common thing. And I would ask my mom why she would never do that. I thought she was a really bad negotiator. And she would tell me that, we have so much more than them. And that's the only thing. Once they sell that, they're done. That's their daily earnings. So you can negotiate at bigger places when you're buying bigger stuff. But when you're buying smaller stuff, don't negotiate. So I think that's something that I really learned from my mom, which has taken me giving me a good perspective of life and how there is so much of disparity, economic disparity in India.
Mm-hmm. So you basically have a sense of, is this a high margin or a low margin transaction? If it's a low margin transaction, then I might just forget about negotiating. But if I know or think I know that there's quite a bit of margin built in, then let's go for it.
Yes.
Okay.
You put it really well.
Okay. Nice.
There was a reason for my question, because back in Australia, I had the retail stores, and we had a great South Asian community around us, and I remember, because obviously back then I wasn't culturally I'm probably still not culturally competent in many ways, but I wasn't as culturally aware as I am now. So there was always this perception that as soon as a South Asian person walked in the store, you knew from my salesman's point of view it was going to be a negotiation. whereas our, we just didn't experience that with maybe most of our other customers. There were other cultures that came in and do that, and I had a wonderful Sri Lankan man who worked for me in that store. He was he's just a wonderful guy, and even he used to say it. He said, "Oh yes, Indian." He said, "Even us Sri Lankans know these Indian people. You have to negotiate with them." Yeah. And so it is. This is the reason I talk about that, is that cultural competence, cultural understanding, and trying to understand the identity, the origins of the people, either your customers, your colleagues, your work, the people you're leading, is so important, because you can have these faux pas if you just assume that everybody's like you and that their identity doesn't have that deeper aspect.
And by the way, when you said about negotiating and that Indians do negotiate a lot, I do negotiate when I go to New York City.
Absolutely right.
So since our overarching topic is identity, I've been having this question on the tip of my tongue ever since we started this, because you, like many of the guests that we had on, Rashmi, you've lived in different corners of the world, and you have experience of living in Anglo parts of the world. You lived in the UK, and now you live in the US. I wonder if the perceived identity of you and your family, so how the society or how the environment in which you live perceives you, how that may or may not be different comparing the UK and the US. The UK being the former colonial power, and the US being an a nation based on immigration. Yet still both cultures very, very dominated by white, dare I say, Caucasian or white people. So is the perception of being Indian different in the UK, or the Indian experience in the UK different than it is in the US?
Absolutely. At least we as a family, my husband and I, felt it as soon as we moved to the US. First of all, we moved to a part of the US that was used to seeing other Indians. When we went to the UK, we moved to more countryside of UK. Not We weren't in London, and so it was slightly different experience where people would try to say that they knew about your food. They had at least one uncle or someone who had been to India. They knew more, but they never thought of us as intellectuals trying to, um, the first. Um, according to me, their perception was these are someone who have come here for a better life.
Mm-hmm.
How much is UK going to benefit from them? I don't know if they thought about that. Whereas when we moved to the India, I think moved to the US, most of the people that we met, uh, Americans that we met, talked about they knowing Indians who were their doctors or who helped them with their taxes or something like that. So they had seen India and Indians from a very different perspective than the British that I met living in England.
So you're being very diplomatic in the way you phrase it. I love it. So since I'm the very direct German, I will paraphrase it, and you will tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong. So the Brits were a little bit condescending in their approach to you, and Americans maybe with a more respectful distance.
Not really. Brits,
okay, good.
They were very sweet, and but it's the microaggressions that I'm talking about. So it's very sweet, very welcoming people. Whereas for the Americans, I thought I had to take my part to make friends with them. I had to go and say, "Hey, hello, how are you?" They wouldn't come to me. On the contrary, the British came to me, say, "Hey, do you need any help? What do you want?" So they were very sweet, and I made a lot of friends. But it's those small microaggressions that we talk about, saying that, "Oh, you're so not Indian. You're all not Indian. So letting you know that we like you because you're not Indian."
Ah, right. That's interesting. That's interesting.
But having said that, I have made the strongest and the sweetest of friends in the UK. So I have a very closest friend of mine who is from the UK. She's married to an Indian, by the way, but so she understands the cultural differences, and I think that's what helped us become friends. She taught me a lot of Indian cooking, by the way. I wasn't that good at it.
when you talk about microaggressions, that leads me down a rabbit hole of what's going on in the United States society in the last 2-3 months, or the flare up that we have seen again in racist transgression and anti-racist activism. Would you, or do you feel, does your family or the NRI community in which you interact, do you feel that that you and your fellow NRI people are also exposed to a similar type of microaggressions or racism as Black people in the United States? Would you put yourself in that same experience, or is it a little bit different for you?
It's a little different, but it's there. So I do compare ourselves to the Black community who are facing really huge problems. I don't want to say that we are facing that, not at all. But as a person of color, and I don't know if it's because we are people of color or because we come from a different country. Because people don't say become white; they say go back to your country. So
yeah, they say that to me too. So it's
yeah, and me. I don't know.
I haven't experienced someone saying that to me yet. that go back to your country, but I've seen people stare. Like, you have to be the perfect person. You can't push around. You can't run to get something. Like, people are just looking like, and I hadn't experienced those looks before, or maybe they were there and I just ignored them. I don't know. But now it's more visible, and it's happened to me in one of the Costco's. So I have experienced it, but not to the level of what other people from either the African American community or the blacks from the US experience.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I know we're getting close to the end time here, but I have one more question to squeeze in, because I noticed it with myself. I think Brett has had similar experience. My identity of what it means to be from my culture, in this case Germany, has shifted because of living abroad. And I think this is an experience that many of us have who move away from our native culture. In two simple sentences, how has your perception of Indian identity changed by moving away from India?
Okay. So that's an absolutely great question. A lot of thinking required for it. I think if my self-awareness about who I'm as an Indian and what people perceive of me when they think India has changed how I work with people. One of the things is, when I have a client that I'm talking to, let's say they have just done an acquisition in India, and they're trying to really get a feel of how they're working, and they're saying that, okay, you know what, we just don't see the accountability. And that's true. People are responsible in India, but the accountability doesn't stay with the individuals, it stays with the leader. And I kind of become more cognizant of it and try to make sure that I'm accountable to my friends, to my neighbors, to people around me. When I say something, I have to do it. And I think that self-awareness, that has changed a little bit of who I am.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps and if that answers.
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, I can attest to that, because Rashmi is someone who teaches me accountability. I'm not the best at responding to things, and I think Rashmi has kind of taught me in not so much telling me, but actually modeling for me, accountability and follow up and things like that in the professional sense, that we're both on the board of CEST USA. And this society is an intercultural society, but it is wonderful. I get to learn from great leaders in that organization like Rashmi, that I need to kind of confront some of my failures in that area. So accountability, granted, that's great. If people take responsibility, but the accountability sits with the leader in that culture. So that little bit of snippet of understanding about Indian culture can really tell you so much about and prepare you so well for going and doing business there, right? That's fantastic. This is great. Thank you. Again, like just most episodes that we have, we could be here all day, and this would be great. But obviously, it's Friday. Happy Friday. Welcome to the end of the week, everybody. Thank you for joining again. If you're watching the replay, thank you for the comments in the sections. I wasn't watching the comments. We've got Yuko here. Antimo is in there. Antimo. From Italy. If you're not born here, sooner or later we're told to get back to yeah. Well, that's right. It happens for everybody, I think, especially if you become critical or in some way look at the culture that you're living in and want to offer some criticism, maybe some improvements, not damaging criticism. But anyway, that's a good point. So Yuko, everybody who's joined, we're so grateful. We're 3 weeks into this into this wonderful experiment. There's our great friend Vali, of course. We all know Vali, wonderful, and we're so grateful to everybody. Of course, I wanted to also share. We do have some YouTube channels. Both Christian and I have got YouTube channels. We would absolutely love it if you would go and subscribe. You can search for our names. Please subscribe. We're begging you. We need friends. We're so lonely. But we both, this show is streamed to both of these channels, but there is wonderful content that Christian does on his own, which is absolutely worth going and looking at and needs to be seen. We will be sharing other videos in those channels about the organizations, just like CEST I mentioned, and other people we're connected with. So if you've got a YouTube channel and you want us to share it and you want us to bring awareness to it, it's all about a community. It's all about sharing. But that will do us for Friday. Yeah.
One more little snippet. If you can't get enough of Rashmi and I, we got something for you next week. I have to look at my calendar. It's next week. We'll post it in the comments. Rashmi and I were invited to speak on a webinar panel for the Toastmasters organization, and that is free for everyone to attend. So we'll post the registration link in the comments. Come join us, because Rashmi and I will talk about how humor can work in intercultural settings. That'll be a laughing matter, right, Rashmi?
Yes.
There we go. All right. Thank you very much, Rashmi. Thanks for taking time. Happy weekend, everybody.
Both of you, and best of luck. Both your YouTube channels. I'm going to be there.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I expect you to subscribe, right? Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.
Bye.